anyone watching on our live stream right now, I want to welcome you to the March 8th platform of the Riverdale Younger Society for Ethical Culture. I know we have some friends watching from home. I'm excited for this morning's talk by Ginan Rauf. She's the co-founder of Otherness, and she's brought with her her other co-founders. It's an organization in New Jersey, and I wanted to read to you what they are about. Otherness is an ethics-based community for humanists from Muslim backgrounds dedicated to providing opportunities for personal growth, promoting social justice, and contributing to an inclusive, multicultural humanism through engagement with the arts, sciences, and humanities in intersectional spaces. So Ginan is going to talk about her story and about reclaiming our stories, which is her title, and let's give her a warm welcome.
Everyone. Thank you for being here. I know that there's a lot of fear, and so I really appreciate that people make the effort to come out and speak. And I'm really glad that this talk is happening because it was a result of the decolonization workshop that we attended, and that's very much something that is on our minds as an organization. And I think that before I start my talk, I'd like to just say that reclaiming our stories is an act of decolonizing the mind and of having a more positive attitude towards our cultures that are often demonized in the media. So I just wanted to say that. And I also wanted to say that for me, all of these flowers, I'm thinking of all the refugees and who are suffering incredibly. Okay, so I hope I don't overshare. I have a tendency to do that. But, I'll be reading parts of mine because it really is a story, and we lived in a single apartment block near the center of town. Our building stood at the edge of a world we hardly knew or understood. The bright Mediterranean sun was kind to us. She gave us many hours of seemingly endless pleasure. We spent the summers jumping in and out of the blue water at the sailing club. My brother and I ordered French fries dipped in harissa, the hot chili paste that the locals use to spice up many of their dishes. That was our private adventure. That was the extent of our exposure to the local culture. That was in Benghazi, Libya in the 1960s. Our world was small, but it felt large and expansive. We moved freely from one apartment to the next. Boundaries collapsed and brought the promise of new adventures. I eagerly lapped up the local gossip. The adults lavished us with warm affection and lots of sweets. Our neighbors were all academics, my father's colleagues at the University of Benghazi. It was a world rich in social connections. And yet, even as children, we sensed something different about ourselves in this tightly knit community. Two memorable incidents mark our rather benign otherness. It was a sunny Friday morning. A mild breeze filled the apartment. Mother was making coffee in the kitchen. My father was listening to Kulthum, a legendary Egyptian singer who had started her career reciting the Quran. I heard mother saying to my father, "He's with Nabila's boys. They're going to the mosque for the Friday prayer." My father answered, "Doesn't the boy know he has exams next week, Father Rauf?" He was usually a mild-mannered man who enjoyed telling his family and friends jokes. In laughter, he found his voice and became a sociable man. Religious authorities were often the butt of his jokes. It's a tradition in the Arab world. 4 o'clock came and passed. Still no sign of my brother. The tension became palpable. Father's rage began to intensify. 6 o'clock came and passed. His menacing breath clung to the air like a heavy cloud. The doorbell finally rang at 8 o'clock. Father ran to the door in his underwear, whitey-tighty, 2 skinny legs, and a big leather belt in his hand. I saw his skinny legs shaking in the dark and nearly burst out laughing. Mother shot me a pained look. She knew Father was about to descend on her favorite child. Growing up in a secular household hadn't spared me from experiencing the ravages of patriarchy or the Oedipus conflict. My brother was baby Jesus to his adoring mother. We often learn about injustice at home. A part of me rejoiced when Father's words fell like a torrent on baby Jesus' head. Are you stupid or something? Why are you wasting your time listening to those ignorant sheikhs? Is that what I sent you to a private school for? So you can go listen to some nonsense at the mosque with those 2 idiots? Do you know how much it costs me? Are you out of your mind? He screamed, unusually for him. I rejoiced until the thick belt bore into my brother's flesh. That moment shall forever be seared into my consciousness. I felt with my entire body what my father could barely decipher with his impoverished imagination. His words stung. Tante Nabila was my mother's best friend. Together they had created a world from the fragments of their past lives. More than anything, Tante Nabila had worked to welcome my foreign Bosnian mother into the Arab world. They both went native as expats in a foreign land by remaking home. That's a lot to dismiss, to call her boys idiots. A year or so later, my father fell seriously ill and had to be hospitalized. It was Tante Nabila's husband who drove mother to the hospital every single day. For 3 months, there she was, a mother with 2 young children and no independent source of income. What I am suggesting here is that these women were perhaps unwittingly, without having the academic language to understand, were practicing what Professor Anthony Pinn calls humanism with a small h. My mother and her pious friend shared a common world. It was a fluid space in which the sacred and the profane easily coexisted. Both women took a worldly delight in worldly things that echoes the spirit of a popular Egyptian proverb, El-Haya Hilwa Khadra. Life is beautiful and green. I am invoking this proverb quite intentionally in order to convey a more textured dimension of female experience in the Arab world. This ardor for life often gets lost in the representation of the monolithic Arab woman who is often reduced to a passive victim of patriarchal religion. I am by no means implying that this is not also a reality for the Muslim world. But as the post-colonial theorist Homi Bhabha warns us, put patriarchy in the dock, but by all means put it in a relative context. Sentence sexism, but specify it too. Specificity is what transports me back to my mother's world. These formative experiences helped shape my feminist, humanist sensibility, as I shall be explaining. My mother and her friends were all housewives, but they saw themselves as makers, active contributors to the well-being of their families. Money was not tight, was not was tight not so much because we were poor, but because resources had to be frugally managed for future time, the return journey home, wherever that might be. Mother often said, who knows where we'll end up going next year? We were both privileged and vulnerable. From the women I learned that the subject is never just one thing or the other. It can be many contradictory things simultaneously and shift with time. Ours was a transitory world fraught with uncertainty. And down among the women, I learned how worlds are lost and remain, how beauty is conjured from retrieved fragments of a broken world that must be transported from place to place. In the sewing circles, Mother worked her magic, cutting out patterns, sewing taffeta dresses, and beading gowns. Consumer culture had not yet overtaken the Arab world. I got a rare glimpse of a time when the home was still a sphere of production. That world was quickly disappearing. One summer, they made an extravagant gown for Tante Nabila's daughter. They'd send that girl off in style. It felt to them like a communal victory. The women ululated, Shakira style. Do you guys remember when Shakira was ululating in the performance in the Super Bowl? So that's a very much associated with the female sphere. It was an expression of communal joy, but they also exchanged stories of grief as they stitched and embroidered. I was all ears. Little did I know at the time that I was absorbing an oral storytelling tradition that was passed down from one generation to the next through the mothers. Virginia Woolf once wrote that we need to think back through the mothers. I lived that and learned to value the critical perspective in those stories. It was specifically feminine. I was hungry for stories. Sometimes they'd send me away. I lurked in dark hallways. Powerful secrets emerged. Tante Nabila spoke of how she sometimes vomited after sex. That kindly man who drove my mother. The women wept and then laughed. A sweet lament. Pain spun into wondrous thread. I felt the thrill of listening to forbidden subjects and tasted the power of words. Such laughter illustrated how speech acts can be weaponized against the oppressor, how stories sometimes come to life in community. I saw power arise from the midst of powerlessness. I knew these men were not gods, for I had taken a peek behind the scenes. There, I saw the women deconstructing masculinity, exposing the public persona as a sham. It didn't require much effort later in life to transfer this irreverent skepticism to the religious realm, to the fantastical claims made by a long tradition of male prophets. The Quran, for instance, makes repeated references to his divine origin, insisting that Muhammad is God's true messenger. That very insistence points to the presence of skeptical voices who cannot be wholly silenced, although they are repeatedly discredited by the text itself. I hear their skepticism. Our task as humanists emerging from Muslim communities is to excavate the silences and challenge the otherness, insisting that we, as skeptics, have always shared an overlapping history right from the beginning. Traces of our dissenting voices can be found scattered in the historical record. We too gather the pieces and try to stitch them together. One particularly striking story comes to mind. It concerns the Prophet's great-granddaughter, Amina. She was once asked why she was so funny and why her sister Fatima was so serious. Her response is telling, and here I'm quoting the Prophet's great-granddaughter. It is because she, Fatma, was named after her Muslim grandmother, while I was named after my pagan great-great-grandmother who died before Islam arrived. Thinking back through my Arab grandmothers, I found the mirth and laughter that makes life sweet. Such sweetness transports me back to the second incident that I wanted to share with you. It was Ramadan, the holy month of fasting. Mother and her friends had gathered for a quick chat before the evening meal. I had a secret and irresistible desire to out my mother. I don't know what came over me that day. Maybe I wanted a little fun, some social drama. Naughty children in Arabic, by the way, are called shaitan, which is like the devil, which is really interesting. But I'll continue my story. Maybe to get back at her for baby Jesus. Maybe to see how words explode a room and clear the space for the forbidden to be uttered. She doesn't fast, you know. She's just pretending. I see her smoking all the time. A stunned silence filled the room. The women scrambled to hold mother's pain. Maybe she's sick today. The sick are excused from fasting, as are menstruating women. Maybe she has her period. They giggled nervously. Nope, she does it all month long, I insisted. Mother's friends wanted to help her. Mother's friends wanted to help her pass, to practice the impiety that went underground and refused to be named. It was the brand of atheism my father advocated. Go along to get along. Why waste your time talking to fools? Why create unnecessary problems for yourself? Religious hypocrisy is rampant in Muslim-majority countries and communities. Now, you might be asking yourself, what does all this have to do with our organization and mass? Why, everything. Let me start by invoking another proverb. Ginan min ghayr nas ma tindas. A paradise without people is uninhabitable, or not to be entered. This proverb evokes the image of a worldly garden that places human sociability at the center of our lives. Our humanism at Otherness focuses on building a community that promotes personal growth in an intersubjective space. It places the flourishing individual at the center of its activities and its defining mission. Engagement with the arts and humanities is therefore crucial insofar as it makes life joyful, allows the individual to exercise her creativity, and expands human awareness as we imagine different possibilities together as we name the forbidden. At Otherness, we recognize that a universal humanism devoid of historical specificity and cultural particularity can devolve into a lifeless abstraction. Humans have an innate capacity to be creative and become builders of cultures that are in themselves intrinsically valuable and enriching. And Otherness categorically rejects the notion that losing one's faith automatically translates into rejecting the diverse cultures from which we emerged. Such specificity serves as an antidote to the harmful stereotypes that are routinely circulated in the West to demonize lesser cultures and reinforce racial hierarchies. Otherness is uniquely situated to challenge the demonization of non-believers from within and to protect our fragile communities from the Islamophobic discourse. Without the narratives that are being weaponized against us by the rise of far-right supremacists throughout the world. Such a stance requires that we cultivate a radical capacity to love brokenness and turn our irreverent skepticism towards all those who would oppress, including ourselves. Our mode of speaking is sometimes confessional. I outed mother, momentarily took delight in baby Jesus' pain. I knew mother as a font of creativity, but also as a male supremacist, and adored her anyway, often from a painful distance. I learned to resist injustice and name the truth at home. Ours is a tragic humanism that acknowledges the darkness within and without, that gazes into our contradictory selves, knows that we are capable of terrible vindictiveness and tender love, of unspeakable cruelty and astonishing kindness. Looking back on my mother's constricted life and unfulfilled potential, I recognize that this tragic humanism is inseparable from larger struggles for social justice, particularly at a time of growing authoritarianism, catastrophic climate change, and obscene levels of inequality. How can the individual flourish if her material needs aren't met? If our cultures constrict what she is capable of becoming by evoking deadening conventions or religious traditions? If the neoliberal order makes it increasingly difficult for the mass majority of human beings to flourish and develop their innate creativity? At Otherness, we are not intimidated by labels such as social warriors. That work is inseparable from our aspirational humanism. We do it with love and courage, thinking of Ma and her friends who yearned for that something more. Thank you.